We're here today for a guest speaker lecture with our new friend, Nick Fett. So Nick, I found a nice intro of you online. I'm gonna read it directly because I suspect that you may have written it yourself, and I want to intro you the way that you would like to be introed. And if I do a bad job, please just correct me.
Coming in, Nick. Super excited to have you. For everyone's context, I met Nick last year, and he's a very impressive individual, super technical, knows a lot about Web3 in general, oracles, bunch of stuff. Great to have Nick here. Looking forward to the talk.
Yeah. So Nick is joining us today, and Nick's an economist, a developer, and a founder at Tellor. And Tellor is a decentralized oracle on the Ethereum network. Formerly, Nick worked as an economist at the US CFTC, which is a federal regulator for derivatives and cryptocurrencies. And over there, he studied market structure of derivatives and implications of new tech. Also went on to found an org called Daxia, which is a derivatives protocol. He received an Ethereum Foundation grant back in 2018 to study security features of oracles and their potential uses in scaling and financial products. Use some of that knowledge to build Tellor, which I'm sure we'll hear a lot about today. So Nick, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no, awesome intro. You'll have to send it to me. I don't know where you got that from. That was probably like my co-founders who wrote that, but that's good. Thanks for having me, everyone. This is an awesome group of people. Just having a lot of people show up for presentations in the crypto space is always good, especially seeing new people getting in. And yeah, I met up with David. He was working on a project that might needed an oracle, and we had met up originally, and then we bumped out again in ETH Denver, which was a good time. So hopefully some of you guys are starting to get to some crypto conferences. But I'm going to start sharing my screen. You guys can. All right, thumbs up. Good. Cool. All right. Yeah. And feel free, like, I know you said you wanted to wait until the end, but if you want to interrupt me and ask questions if it's relevant, definitely go ahead and do it. It's a nice and long presentation. So it's like an intro to oracles, which you guys should realize are really simple. So just yell at me if I'm going too fast or you guys already know everything about oracles. And then we can just do code walkthrough and talk about it. But yeah, as he was saying, I founded a company in the space, 2 of them now. And then we also have a token and been around for a while, at least in terms of the crypto space. So if you have any questions or ever want to just reach out, talk about getting involved, let me know. So blockchain oracles. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, these things we call blockchains and smart contracts, they can't read external data. So despite being called smart contracts, they can't go and read an API. So if you wanted, say, the weather in your smart contracts, that is unfortunate because there's no way for you to access it. The reason for this is that everything is deterministic. So if you need to be able to validate it. So if you have the Ethereum network and you have a history of transactions, you should be able to replay all of the transactions and get the exact same answer as me if I do it 10 minutes later or even a year later. And the problem is if you're calling some external API, you obviously come to different answers. So you can't do that. Everything has to be placed in as an input. And that's basically what an oracle is. So you can just think of it, who gets to put that into your smart contract? So most of the time, so if you have, going back to our example, our smart contract needs to know what the weather is. You would have some sort of function there that would allow you to input, this is the weather, and who gets to put that in is your oracle. Now this can just be one person. So I could say, David, you'll be my trusted oracle. You can do it. It could be a multi-sig. So you could have 2 or 3 people get to say what it was. You can use things on chain. So you could use, say there was a decentralized exchange that was trading weather futures or something. That could be your oracle, for instance. Basically, it's just any method around forming a consensus for placing that input on chain. That's it. That's all an oracle is. And so what are these used for? Like, why do we care? The big thing that they're used for right now is price feeds. If you think about it, MakerDAO, like they have DAI, you have ETH in a contract and you're making DAI, the stable coin, you want to peg it to the ETH US dollar price. How do you know what the ETH US dollar price is? Well, you need an oracle to tell you that. Any derivatives contract, you have a settlement price at the end. So you have all these price feeds, and that's primarily what they're used for now. But other things oracles are used for. So there's bridges. Other chains are basically the same as weather data. It's just off-chain information to Ethereum. So if you wanted to bridge Ethereum and Bitcoin, you wanted to pass transaction headers or block headers back and forth, you need oracles to do this. That's where sort of trust comes in. The same with like cross-chain AMM. So if you guys have seen Thorchain with I put this in but my tabs. I'm looking at Stargate now. They just raised a boatload of money. Their new cross-chain AMM. Yeah, it's basically if you want to know, you have liquidity on one chain and liquidity on another, and you need oracles to pass information back and forth. Prediction market settlement. So this stuff doesn't have to be prices or blockchain information. It could be who won the presidency. It could be any sort of information, insurance. All these things need oracles. Basically, if you're going to connect the real world into a blockchain, you need an oracle. If you want to do a real estate token, anytime you want to do anything like that, you need an oracle. So what are the designs? You have a whole slew of designs. There's everything from centralized, I just give it to David, or you could do different things such as multi-sigs. You can do whitelisted pieces. You could have a proof of stake system. You could have a delegated proof of stake system, or you could have fully decentralized ones. This is the current fave in the DeFi space. You just have a bunch of like the multi-sig one. Most of the oracles you probably hear about in the current DeFi space are just going to be there's some whitelisted nodes, and they provide a price feed, or they'll place some information in your smart contract. Doing good so far. Cool. Current landscape. So as far as names go, that you guys, if you want to look up some of these, there's Tellor. Obviously, that's the one I ran, so I just put up first. Chainlink, they're probably the biggest, mainly by market cap alone. There's Band, they're a Cosmos-based oracle. API 3, if you guys go look them up, they're more of, they like sign off-chain information. So their design, I'm not really going to go into these people's designs too much here, but API, Band and Chainlink are more of their like whitelisted nodes, delegated proof of stake type things. API 3 is, they would get Coinbase to sign Coinbase's price, or Binance to sign Binance's price. And then you could use those signed transactions in there. Maker has a whitelisted group of a bunch of people. That's their oracle. And then Swap. Hopefully you guys know what Uniswap is. That's a decentralized AMM. So that's it for oracles. As far as some of the different designs go and what the landscape looks like, it's still really new, because I'll be honest, the biggest sort of competitor that we have at Tellor, or who are we fighting against, it's basically the centralized oracle. A lot of, anytime people are creating new projects, a lot of times people still will just use the team. It's to be their oracle. If you guys saw, there was recently, I don't know how many of you follow like crypto regulations, but there was the Poly market. They were a derivatives prediction market platform, and they just got charged by the CFTC. And they said that you have to go registered to be an exchange. Part of the reason was because you ran your own oracle. You're centralized and you have to register as an exchange. So it's a big deal. The regulators are starting to crack down on it. Make sure that you should be using a decentralized oracle. It's what sort of sets you apart. And the reason that you're using a blockchain in general is so that you don't have some central intermediary. If we put Dave as our oracle, that would be not good. But now for you guys, I wanted to give you guys a bit of, okay, so like now we know some different designs of oracles. We can go look into them. But what do you have to think about whenever you're creating your projects? So if you're making a new derivatives platform like Synthetics, or you're coming up with a new bridge, what are some things what are the challenges that you're going to face whenever trying to implement or trying to choose which oracle to use? The big thing that you have to realize is that there's a challenge. Like, it's just a consensus mechanism. We were talking about it. It's not necessarily difficult, but the problem is fast oracles. If you want fast, that's really hard. And I think what you'll see is this holds for oracles too. So I think you guys have probably covered this, right? Hopefully you guys have in your class, but this is the scalability trilemma. Anytime you talk about L1s, that there's a trade-off. If you want to be decentralized, secure, and fast, you can't do all of them. And most of the times, if somebody came to you and was like, hey, I created this new blockchain and it does 10 million transactions per second and it's going to change the world, you guys would all be like, oh, that's bullshit. There's no way that you do that, because you obviously sacrificed on decentralization or security. That's how you got that speed. And since the basics is it's a consensus problem, and it holds for oracles too. And this is where we like to talk about, there's like multiple layers of finality. So we'll do like the basic example of if you need a price feed. For the first question, which I probably won't go over in this talk, but it's more of like just a basic finance one, is, well, what should your price feed be? Should it be a median of 5 exchanges? Should it be just one exchange? Should you even specify an exchange? If you want the Bitcoin price, there's a really big difference between, I want the Bitcoin price on Coinbase versus I want the Bitcoin price from 10 different exchanges of TWAP over the last 30 minutes. both are the Bitcoin price, but they're very different and they're going to have really big differences. And that's more of a financial question. But the first thing that you have to realize is it has some issues for your Oracle. If you choose, hey, I just want to use the Coinbase price, then you might as well just allow Coinbase to be your Oracle, because they can sort of censor you and shut down their API at any minute. But back to one of the bigger challenges as far as getting it fast, you basically have to wait for them to update. You have to wait for all of those sources to update. Then you have to place the value on chain. As you guys know, with Ethereum, sometimes placing things on chain takes a minute. It's like just gas issues. And then also you actually need to verify the value. So any Oracle design worth their salt will basically allow you to have some mechanism for disputing it, or you're going to have some way to say, hey, it was wrong. Because whether it's Uniswap, whether it's Tellor, whether it's Chainlink, there's always like a cost to break something. If you think about Uniswap as far as being an Oracle, if you really wanted to, you could put a bunch of money in on one side and throw the price of Uniswap. You'll probably lose money if you're betting on some derivative platform that the price is going to be different. You can probably make a whole lot of money on there. So you have to assume that your Oracle can be wrong, and there has to be a way to say, hey, it was wrong, we're going to go dispute it. And then, so after all of these different things, now the value is finally usable. So we'll move on. So I think I just went over this whenever I shouldn't have. But this was just talking subjectivity is an important piece. So especially on the first piece, I don't know, I'll just pass it over because I've already basically read that slide. But this one, we're going to go back over chain inclusion. So whenever you're working with a bridge or a price feed and you have gas costs, the biggest risk for Oracle. So like you could attack Tellor's Oracle and say, hey, we're going to put bad values on chain. And we're going to spam. So any Oracle could say, there's always a way to say like, the Bitcoin price is going to be $10 million, and then we're going to win a bunch of money in derivatives. That's going to be great. That's actually not the biggest risk to Oracles. That's usually crazy expensive on most Oracle designs. Like it's really hard to say that the Bitcoin price is $10 million. But what it's actually not that expensive to do is just to censor you from getting a block in. If you guys know right now, the cost to 51% attack, I have it up here. If you wanted to stall and mine every single block on Ethereum for the next hour, you would actually think it's crazy expensive, but it's just over $1 million. It's not. Ethereum's actually right now higher than Bitcoin, which is another really cool thing. But it's not that expensive to mine every single block. And of course, you could mine every single block and do a 51% attack that they're going to say revert the chain. So you could say increase your balance of whatever and try and break the Ethereum chain, but that'll eventually get reverted after the hour. But for Oracles, what you could do is a more malicious attack where you could just say, hey, nobody's making any contract calls to the Tellor contract over the next hour, and just not allow any updates. And nobody would ever revert that. You didn't lie. You didn't say anything was wrong. So it would just basically, if your DApp needed an Oracle update within the hour, there's actually nothing we can really do about it. If somebody's willing to just mine every block on Ethereum, and this goes for every Oracle, whether it's Chainlink, whether it's even Uniswap, you could just prevent all contract calls to Uniswap for an hour. It would be probably pretty devastating to the space. But these are just some things to think about when designing your app. And so if you design some sort of DeFi application that say you need a price feed every minute, or else this thing's going to break, like you can know right off the bat, you're going to have a bad time. All right. So verifying Oracle data. So any protocol must have an ability to verify when the data is put on chain. So like we were saying, you need some way to dispute it. And the time necessary that you're going to want to think about here is just how difficult is it to verify this information. So some information, like whether it's the Bitcoin price, that's super easy to validate. You can probably say that the Bitcoin price was right or wrong relatively quickly, but other things you're going to have to wait for a bit longer. We were working with a project to bring over Bitcoin transaction proofs. And part of the problem with Bitcoin is that it's not final. Kind of like we were talking about in the previous slide. So if our oracles put over some block header that's 10 minutes old, the first one, like it's probably going to be correct. You've had reorgs on Bitcoin that go back a half hour. This is why if you've ever deposited money on Coinbase, they make you wait an hour for most of these things. So if you deposit a whole bunch of Bitcoin on Coinbase, they're going to make you wait an hour to make sure it was actually included in the block before you're allowed to do anything with it. Other things that take some time to validate are just things that are just harder to look up or more nuanced. There were some prediction market problems around the presidency. They ended the day after the election. But if you guys remember, it was still semi-unclear as far as who won the day after the election. And some prediction markets broke because things weren't necessarily finalized. And this just goes into an Oracle problem. It wasn't the Oracle's fault. Like the information just wasn't there. So you have to really think about, okay, is there a way to put on some null value or say, no, we're going to kick it off and wait for 24 more hours or something like that. So this is me harping on just some of the best practices for oracles. So obscure data, allow more time, subjective data, more time, higher value secured, allow more time. This is just stuff that you should know. If you guys saw, there was recently the wormhole hack. That was a big one in the news. Solana has a bridge, and a bunch of the way that most bridges work is you would lock, say, a whole bunch of ETH on main chain Ethereum, and then some Oracle would say, hey, unlock this synthetic ETH over on Solana, and then people can trade around with it. And then in order to unlock your ETH on main chain, you would lock the synthetic ETH, and then an Oracle would pass it over to the main chain and give you that main chain ETH back. Unfortunately, they had a contract bug that broke everything, and hundreds of millions of dollars got stolen because people could mint synthetic ETH. But the bigger issue was, you guys should go look at Vitalik. Actually had a whole bunch of posts on why the wormhole, that was the name of their bridge, was just an awful model. Because what somebody could have done is they could have deposited a whole bunch of ETH on Ethereum, minted a whole bunch of synthetic ETH over on Solana, traded it, and then reverted the whole chain on Ethereum to say, we never actually sent you any Ethereum. And Vitalik was warning about this right whenever they launched, but they hand waved it away. In a lot of ways, they said, oh, basically, because their bridge was just a group of 5 guys, I think, who were running the whole thing. And they're like, no, like we're the trusted party, and like we're making sure that it's legit. Long story short, when they got hacked, they lost, tons, millions and millions of dollars, and the companies backing Solana basically just paid it. They just made everyone whole. And I think they had $80 million of ETH like funded in the contract to make the whole thing whole. And like within a day, it was absurd. So if you're really rich, you can hand wave over Oracle problems. Yeah, it was absurd. So I don't know how much they made whole like within the day, but it was a lot. But so think about that next time you're using a bridge. Be careful. So now I'm going to get into quickly. We like almost halfway done. Yeah, we can do quickly. I'll tell you guys how Tellor works, and then we can then maybe we can do questions and then the implementation, or the other way around. I don't know. It makes sense. I don't know if we even have any questions, but
we've got a long list of questions going into, or it's not that long. It's maybe 10 questions so far.
Okay.
And they may or may not be related to what has already been covered. Some of them were put there before the lecture started.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we can maybe do the questions, and then we can, depending on how much time we have left, then I'll do the walkthrough for doing Tellor.
Okay, let's do that.
That way, well, because I could make the walkthrough depending on how deep into Solidity code we want to get. So it'll just be up to you guys. But quickly, how Tellor works. So we tried to build an actually decentralized Oracle. So we backed into the problem. I had started a derivatives protocol, and this was in 2017, and we were looking for an Oracle. Couldn't find any good Oracles in 2017. So we decided to just create our own. We just went from basic principles, like how do you actually have something decentralized? So you would stake, if you want to be a reporter, you stake our token. So you grab some TRB tokens and you stake it in a contract. And now you're allowed to report data. So somebody would come to us and they would say, hey, I would like the Bitcoin US dollar price. I'll pay you $10 worth of TRB to go get it for me. Now, any of those reporters can submit the price of Bitcoin US dollar. Once they do that, it's a race. The first person to do it gets the reward. And then anybody can monitor the network and check whether or not they lied. So they can say, hey, the Bitcoin US dollar price is not $10 million. And then they would submit a small fee to dispute it. And then it would go to a vote as far as whether or not that person lied. If they lied, they get slashed. If they didn't lie, they get the dispute fee. For the users, it's nice and simple. They basically get this nice feed of Bitcoin US dollar price. And even if somebody does get disputed, so say well, a bad reporter comes in and submits, hey, it's Bitcoin price is $10 million, they would just get the data again. Somebody else would report it. They could just tip again, and you don't actually have to wait 2 days for everything to go. You actually you might not even care about the results. It's about you're a one-off thing. So that's the way that Tellor works. We're definitely open to critiques, but we're on Ethereum, Polygon, just launched. We're on Arbitrum's testnet now, just launched on Harmony, and we're launching on Algorand for our first non-EVM chain. We're doing that next month. So slowly going all the chains, but trying to find users out there and get people to understand how to use oracles correctly and actually care about decentralization. So,
hey, just out of curiosity, how many reporters are on the Ethereum version of Tellor?
there's like 70, I believe. So it's crazy competitive on main chain Ethereum. Like whenever somebody comes and will say, it could be like, I think it's usually like, you have to pay, basically you have to pay for their gas. So to get a report updated, you have to make sure that you cover the reporter's gas. And then if it's like basically $1 more, all of the reporters have MEV bots installed to go and front run each other to try and get that $1 of profit. So it's definitely a tough game over there on mainnet Ethereum. So we're trying to work as far as how to decentralize it more. We've open sourced a lot of the MEV stuff ourselves to make sure that it is fair. But yeah, it's one of these hyper capitalistic models that sort of led to people, just really making it efficient, which is good for our users. So it's nice and about as cheap as it can possibly be. So
If you feel like this is a good point to break and just field some questions, I can start featuring.
Sure. Yeah, go for it.
All right. I'm not going to go in any particular order. I'm just going to go by them. I'm going to go in the order that they were submitted in. So they may or may not align with what was just presented, but should be relevant. Okay. From Melville, we have major protocols rely on Chainlink to power their contracts. Are we just waiting for a Chainlink vulnerability to bring down half of DeFi? How worried are you about something like this?
Sure. Yeah, no, I think a lot of them do rely on Chainlink, but how do I think Chainlink's going to fail in the future? Do I think Chainlink's going to lie? Like probably not. You could, but like same with, even if you were using Goldman Sachs as your Oracle, do you expect Goldman Sachs to lie? Not necessarily. They're probably going to be honest. They're going to probably some revenue stream, and Chainlink's got kind of the cash cow of their token. So they'll probably be just fine and continue. I would hope that some people would say you would have more of the spirit of decentralization getting pushed in there. I think the regulations are going to play a big piece in forcing people or Chainlink to decentralize. Similar to like I was talking about that poly market action, so if you have a prediction market and they run their own Oracle, that's illegal and you need to go register as an exchange. If you hand that Oracle service over to one person, who now has to go register? If that's your best friend, is it decentralized? Well, no. If it's just David, is that decentralized? No. If it's just Chainlink, do they have to go register? Maybe. And I think there's going to be some sort of pieces there where they might get in trouble. They've also had a lot of issues in the past with just staying up to date. I think some of their mechanisms are broken. If you remember, there was like Black Thursday a while ago where token prices fell by 50% in a single day. Like everything, like Ethereum fell by 50% in a day. Like other ones were down even more, and gas prices shot up to 1,000 GWay. The problem with Chainlink's people, they have a whitelisted group of 21 people or something who are providing prices, and all of their nodes were like, well, it's expensive. Like we're good. And the whole network kind of froze, and there's not really any benefit or loss for them as far as making it go away, because they don't have slashing even on their network yet. It's not quite as big of a penalty to them. Maker had a similar issues too. Maker has a whitelisted group of oracles, and on Black Thursday, their issue was the ETH price fell and they knew all the Maker stuff was going to get uncollateralized. Shocker, their oracles took a little bit longer to update so they could get their shit together and get things ready for it. And just those kind of, there's some weird kind of conflicts of interest whenever it comes to slashing oracles or even saying something's wrong. if your reporters are tied to your token price and things like that.
Okay. I think that answer actually answered our next question in the line too, which was basically, I'm not convinced decentralized oracles like Chainlink are really decentralized. We may be saying that they're and the question is like, could you please convince me? We can map that question for Tellor too.
Yeah. I think Tellor, like you can, there's two levels of decentralization. Like everyone will say, oh, it's a scale. I don't even think Chainlink gets on the scale, to be honest. There's the first piece of you're theoretically decentralized as far as you Tellor, like I told you guys how it works. It's theoretically decentralized. And then you ask the correct questions as far as, okay, so it's theoretically decentralized, but now how many nodes do you have? What are the distributors of the nodes? How many, does the team hold 55% of the tokens? Like you would ask those questions next and then make sure that it's actually decentralized. But like Chainlink, I know they're like whitelisted still. If there's one guy with an admin key, like you don't even get to start asking questions about nodes. You got to throw that away first. So that would be, but there's some good stuff on Chainlink. You can go, Eric Wall he's a famous Twitter personality, but he's probably the most well-known Chainlink basher out there. As far as he just goes after them for their centralization, which is usually fair.
I'm going to take the next one in the line. It says, question about decentralization of third-party data. Data, particularly coming from a Web 2 and corporate-centric world, is generally owned by centralized entities. Would oracles then be responsible for determining the viability of the data by transferring it to the blockchain? How do you handle decentralization of real world data that's being transmitted on chain?
Completely. Yeah. So it's so Tellor sort of works as far as this goes into the one thing I was talking about. What's a good settlement price? You can have, if a user comes to us and they're like, I want the price of Coinbase on here. It's like, we can do that for you. It's okay. But usually you want the data to actually be subjective as well. So there's like, we try and tell people using a price feed, like just say, what's the price of Bitcoin? Don't tell us where to get it from. Don't give us specifics. And then it's up to the reporters to go and find and pick a valid Bitcoin price. Of course, you have to be more okay with it's not going to be that exact specific thing. So if you're doing like a derivative product that wants to hedge the price on Coinbase, it might be, say, a poor substitute. But if you have more of these questions where you can get these from multiple sources, it's okay. That's why there's always a difference between what's the result of this API query versus something like if you wanted the weather in San Diego, what's the result of this API query that gets the weather result in San Diego versus just asking, what's the weather in San Diego? And then you can get it from multiple places and hopefully that should break it down. But it's one of those things where, yeah, like the more subjective your data is, actually the more decentralized it can be. So try and push for, say, DeFi applications or other applications that can have this more subjective kind of data that anybody can validate without relying on one single source of truth.
Cool. Okay. Next one. Can oracles secure networks with higher value than what's at stake in the oracles protocol?
Yes, for sure. Tellor, we only require you to stake $2,000 worth of tokens. But the problem is if you wanted to break it, you would have to just break it basically you would get disputed and then it would go and then somebody else would put it on and then that person would have to lie and then the next person would have to lie and it would just keep getting disputed. So as long as anybody can dispute it, and especially with Tellor, so I guess with Tellor, the reason it's different is like anybody can come and stake more. So like you would assume even if you like dispute, like you could come on right now and just dispute all 70 of those validators and it wouldn't cost you that much, but there's absolutely nothing you can do to prevent other people from coming on and staking more. And that's what's important. Even with like Ethereum and other proof of stake networks, as long as it's open for more people to stake, you'll just have this lack of finality while more people are coming on staking, unless you truly do buy up all of the assets or something like that.
Okay. Next one, another one from Melvillian. How are L2s and other scaling mechanisms changing the design considerations for oracles?
It's definitely forcing you to, for us, it's forcing you to be able to go on any network really quickly. We were in the past, it was always harder for Tellor and other networks. You have to get really good because if you assume that new rollups are going to be popping up left and right, you got to get really fast spinning up oracles on these networks and being able to support them and having a model that can do that. If you have a model where all of the staked assets are only on one chain, that's actually bad because if you're only staked natively on Ethereum, but the data reporting is happening on all different chains, then your chain isn't even necessarily native to Ethereum. And that's like, we've even started to separate governance contracts for each of these chains as far as like where the voting happens, because sometimes it's different. Like sometimes the users and the reporters and things like that, whenever the data is subjective, you can have different opinions on different networks, and it makes it much, much harder, I would say, for having all of these different chains. But at the same time, it's super good for oracles because we found a bunch of customers who want to do bridging and cross-chain stuff, which is really exciting. It would never happen if you couldn't be on two networks. So that's good. I don't know if that answered your question, but it's all over the place. Cool.
I've got another one from Melville that I feel is a really great question. So has your research into blockchain oracles caused you to look at Web2 oracles in a different way? Do you look at our real world or regular world sources of information differently based on your experience now? And is there anything that you think we can do to combat disinformation by leveraging Oracle technic?
Yeah, that one's super tough. I think I came from it originally. Like I came originally from the financial side at the CFTC. We had reviewed a lot of settlement prices, and I had left right around the time, if you guys remember, there was the giant LIBOR scandal. LIBOR, for those of you that don't know, like it was basically all the swaps. So like interest rate swaps, and these are like bespoke financial products that only banks do, but they have $500 trillion worth of these things outstanding. And they were all settling to this one interest rate that was controlled by these 12 banks in London. And that was, they would all set the rate daily. But then it came out, somebody leaked emails and phone calls that it was basically like most of these guys were having lunch every day. And they would say things, they would shoot emails back and forth. Hey, can we knock it down 0.25%? I'll buy you a drink after work. And this was like trillions of dollars are settling on this interest rate. And it was just casually being thrown about by these 12 dudes. And sorry, I think you're talking, Melville. We can't hear you. So.
Yeah, Melville, you're not muted, but your audio is in.
All right.
We'll come back to you.
Yeah, but it was, anyway, so that was one of the first things, like you realize, man, like how much of our data in the real world is like this. And it just doesn't even make any sense. The same with, if you guys saw, there's been a lot of like shenanigans with futures prices. Like oil had a negative futures price last year, and everyone's like, how on earth is this possible? Like, and tons of people lost money. And it was just like the importance of good data just really mattered in a lot of these financial contracts. As far as like combating misinformation and saying what truth is, this goes more into like philosophy as far as like truth subjective and who gets to say what truth is. Like blockchain oracles are probably, I'll be honest, if you ask these guys deep philosophical questions and want our reporters to vote on it, it's a bunch of Russian and Chinese dudes who are competing at MEV on our network. So I don't know if it's the best group of dudes to answer any of these questions, but if you want something that they can actually validate and put on chain, they'll go do it for you.
That was a really good answer. Melville, do you want to follow up, or
you can just type an answer? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. If you want to type into the chat, I'll speak for you. Okay, but in the meantime, let's do another one. This one's from Owen. How do oracles update their values in a fast way without expending a ton of gas? That may or may not have come in before the talk.
Yeah, but you do spend a ton of gas. Like this is another reason we had trouble with competing with Chainlink early on. And we still kind of have some trouble with it because like Chainlink subsidizes all the users' gas. So it makes it really nice to use Chainlink. In general, like if you just think about how a network actually has to work, like if somebody's placing this data on chain, somebody has to pay for that gas. We have a pretty gas efficient way of doing it, but a peak at like sometimes when it would get up to 200 Gwei, it would be $100 to get a piece of data on main chain Ethereum. Like just writing anything to storage is so expensive. If you need a data point, you're going to have to pay $100 to get it on chain. And that's just ultimately how it's going to have to work. And we tell this to users because like sometimes you'll have like users who were trying to build, like liquidation, say futures contracts that were like 100x leverage. And they would be like, we need a minute by minute update. And I'm like, let's do the math here. It's going to cost you $100 per queries during some days. Like it's $100 per query. How often do you actually need this thing updated? And so they would be like, all right, maybe we're going to go on an L2 or something. But even L2s, they can get expensive at times. Make sure that you're okay paying the gas, or at least having somebody able to pay the gas. That's why it was important for Tellor. If you kind of, I was talking about Chainlink or Maker, like on Black Thursday, the nodes kind of went down because there was no like what's the mechanism for tipping them higher in gas prices? You just trust that they're going to be paying more. You want to have a network where if gas prices spike, the user can say, no, like here's an extra $100, please get my data through, or the user can just go do it themselves. Like we have on our network, for instance, on Polygon, we found like a lot of projects there. They're just like, I won't worry about tipping. I'm just going to be the Oracle myself, and they'll stake tokens in the Teller network and just report themselves. And it's actually fine. Anybody can still dispute it and check it, but they're like, oh, we want to make sure that it's up to date. Good. So
that's super interesting. I have a follow-up from Melville on the previous question. He wants to know, did anyone from the LIBOR scandal get arrested or like shunned or reputation tarnished or?
No, they just paid $1 billion or whatever to the regulator, but it was like the banks doing it. So maybe they lost their bonus at their job.
Got some slashing.
Yeah.
Regular slashing. Cool. All right. Oops, sorry, I didn't mute. I want to make sure that we save time for the code walkthrough, and we've only got 10 minutes left. How much time do you need for a good code walkthrough? Is 10 minutes enough?
Maybe not, depending on how deep you want to go. Teller's super simple, so I can just show you guys the basics of it without actually coding it.
Oh, let's jump into that, because I think there's a lot of folks in the room would really value that experience.
Sure. This is the basics of implementing an Oracle. You're basically just reading a contract. Like I know you guys all know how to read a contract, and this is the example. We just have to get current value, but I'll actually go walk you guys through it here. So I built a sample project the other day. I was going to, don't mind all of my stuff here. Yeah, so new project. So this is sample using Teller project. So the basic way for you guys to install and use Teller, or it's very similar to Chainlink, or I know Yuma is almost identical as well. You just would npm install using Teller. So you this is a hard hat repo. We work in hard hat and truffle, or what else you guys are using. Last week, we just wrote a sample Viper contract. So if you guys have ever tried Viper and want to, I don't know if I recommend you being the first Teller user using Viper, but you can.
Though there may be folks in the room who have played with other tools. Everyone here, the course, is using hard hat.
Cool.
So we're very familiar with this environment.
Yeah. So you would npm install using Teller, and then I called the contract sample using Teller is using Teller. And that basically imports your whole thing. And in using Teller, basically we have just a list of get current value, read get data before, just a bunch of ways to grab the data. Anytime you're doing Teller data, you need we call it a query ID. And this is how you identify what your data is. So I was actually going to show you guys how to make one of those quick. But like the Teller IDs, so if you wanted to make like a spot price, so we have this type, there's a repo full of what these types are. These are other ones that we have available, or you can do a fully custom one. So if you wanted, say, like the BTC or lowercase BTC USD, you could just generate this, and this will give you your query ID. And this is the query data. So every time anyone reports this data, they have to also place in this. So this is like the final argument, and it doesn't get stored on chain. It's just solely in like an event and in the input. But that way our reporters see what this comes out to. So this is the byte string, and it means spot price Bitcoin US dollar. So then anybody could see, other reporters would see it. They'd be able to hash it out. So then even if you put on something, say we've never done it before, I don't know what would be some really weird, like the Stargate token. So like you could do like STG Euro, and then you could generate it. And then, okay, so our reporters would see, hey, there's this new ID I haven't heard of. They could hash it and then do it. Or what you can even do, like with a custom thing, you can actually create your own. So we're playing around with some that say you could even just have like question, and then you could have a string and say, who's the president? And then like you can generate the ID for that one and come up with it. And then hopefully the reporters could, if they wanted to, they could submit for this. Obviously, you would want to test it out, make sure that people know how to do it. But
so when questions are submitted, forgive me for interrupting with this, but it's going to sound like a naive question. But when questions are submitted, it seems like you can really ask anything. But the reporters, these 70 folks, it's mostly automated bots that are answering the questions, right? So where are they getting the answers from?
So the weird ones, the automated bots will answer the questions from. That's why there are people out there who like, there's a few more manual people out there, and they love whenever you get the more bespoke questions, because that's the ones that they get to answer and don't have to compete with MEV bots.
So that's amazing. It's almost like just like a forum. It's like a Stack Overflow almost.
Yeah, so you can have it. And usually we tell people like, make sure that you ask it on testnet first and things like that, because usually depending on how people will answer the questions, you're going to have to know how to parse it in your smart contracts. So whether you're going to convert it to a uint or a string, because we're going to return bytes as the answer. So you have to know how to parse it and actually use it in your contract. So good. Okay, so back to the code. My Zoom window always keeps getting in the way. It's like the most annoying thing. So back to the code. We can show you guys. So the basics of it, what I was going to do here is like a simple did it go up contract. So we're going to have my value and a time set. And then at the end, we'll print, did the value go up over time? So once you deploy the contract, you'll basically have in here, you're going to do read teller value before, which I wrote down here. So this actually just, I don't know why I did this, but it runs get data before. And get data before is what you actually want to use. So you'll see here, you're going to get the data that's 5 minutes old. And if you guys are paying attention, the reason that you want it 5 minutes old is that you want to give it time for somebody to dispute it. So if it was a bad value, you're giving them 5 minutes to go and somebody can go dispute it and you won't get it. So you're going to get a value and timestamp back from this. We're going to require that the value is less than an hour old. And then we set it here. And that's basically it. So, you would enter in my ID and then it would just go and grab whatever value's there for teller. Of course, off chain, you would want to make sure that this gets mined. So you would want to go and run tip on our contract before you ran this function to make sure that somebody mines it, or go submit it yourself. And then you see here, I did bytes to uint for the value because it's a byte. It comes back as a bytes value and then I got to convert it to a uint. Another note for you new Solidity developers, there are much more gas efficient ways to do this and converting bytes to uint. Be careful using assembly code. It's always crazy dangerous. So you can probably, I think we found like the most efficient gas method can shave 200 gas off of this function. But then if your bytes are only 30 strings long, then you start reading free memory and you break everything. So there's always caveats anytime you're using assembly. Just be careful. And then you guys will see down here, we'll wait 7 days. And then what we'll do is we'll just run it again. So we read tell a 5 minute old value that's less than an hour old, convert it to a uint. And then if the new value is greater than my value, we'll admit yes, go up. And then didn't go up. So that's a basics, super easy to use teller. The only sort of thing that you would really need to go get in your constructor. So you need the teller address. Obviously, if you're on Polygon, it's going to be different than if it's on main chain, or if you're on Arbitrum, it'll be different. So make sure you get the right teller address, and then you'll just need to grab an ID and this thing works. So I was testing out, and then I wrote some test scripts. So this is we have a sample using teller repo. You guys can go check this code out, but we use hard hat tests. We love hard hat tests, and you can see here, we deploy it in the before each, and then we'll test our values. We'll come here, we actually create the query data args here, make some mock values. Here, we just submit the value. You'll see in Teller Oracle, so we use what's called the playground for testing. So if you guys ever playing around with it and see the playground, basically that's Teller without any rules. So you don't actually have to go stake. You don't have to get real money or anything like that. It allows, there's even like a token minting thing for you to go test out. That way you can just instantly on any testnet or in your code for local testing, you can just start submitting values and then reading them, but it won't work on say main chain, for instance, because you're not staked. But we submit the value, and then we do check that reading teller values right, and then we run our set value function. So we can run that, see if it actually works for you guys. Yeah. And there you go. So that one worked. You can see I consoled the first value, and then I consoled. It did go up. And yes, it did go up because we went from 100 to 200. So that's the basics of it. But We give, you guys should go watch. We have our CEO, Brenda, she gave another talk on, we have what's called like a checklist for Solidity projects. It's a really good one about how we just think about testing. It's all about how to properly test your Solidity contracts. So that's a really good one. Any questions, I guess, on this? I know we're like at time, but I don't know. I have more time if you guys want it.
I have one myself. Representing a very security focused Web3 school, I feel compelled to ask, now that we have this new tool available to us using Tellor, is there any new security concerns that we should keep top of mind if we are to inherit using Tellor?
Yeah, the biggest thing I was talking about a lot of the fast Oracle designs, so making sure that if your Oracle breaks, you have some fallbacks in place. So if a bad value does, making sure like you're not reading, that's why I have the 5 minutes here. Give it time for disputes, or if something happens, if say somebody is censoring the Ethereum network and not letting Tellor values to go through, making sure that your application doesn't break. Another really important thing, I'm guessing you guys have gone over mainnet forking tests, another super helpful tool. So if you want to, Tellor is already a smart contract that's live on mainnet. You can use in the test repos, like you can pull down this, but an even better security practice would be to just actually fork what's up there right now on mainnet. And make sure that it might take a little bit longer and writing it, but now you're going to be interacting directly with those smart contracts. And that's for serious projects we recommend. Make sure you, go actually fork what's up there. Go make sure that nothing that you're doing is going to break it. So.
Cool. That's really great advice. Does anybody else have any questions about the code that we're looking at or any of the technical bits?
I have a question. You mentioned that Solidity checklist. I think you said it was in a presentation or something recently. I just wanted to see if we had a link for that one.
I can find it for you. Yeah.
I also got this recorded, Cameron. So if we need to go back and peek that way, a link to the slides would be really nice.
Cool. Yeah, no, I can send you guys all those. We do. Yeah, because I think we've gone through 4 audits now on our code, or we've done several upgrades over the years. So we get an audit each time, and just taking what we've learned over the years. It's getting better because I'm sure you guys knew, like I did data science before this at the CFTC. So I was an economist, but you would just work with big data sets, and then going into this mindset of like really having to become security focused. It's a whole new world.
Thanks.
Does anybody else want to shout one out? Got a shy lunch today. Okay. All right. I'm scanning through the list of questions from before, see if I skipped any. I actually might
just real quick, just a reminder to everyone, since we are over time, feel free to drop off. There's no reason. If you want to stick around, great. But otherwise, time's yours. So
absolutely.
Thanks everyone for listening. If you guys ever have any questions or want to reach out, or you're doing your own project, definitely just reach out. Like that's the one piece of advice I would say with if you're getting into the Web3 space from the Web2 space, like in Web2, like these companies are so big, but in Web3, like all these companies are so small. If you're going to use a project, like literally just email them and ask to talk to the founders, and they'll probably answer your emails. They're really small companies, and most of the time, like they'll sit with you and help you do your code. Like we're over there implementing on Algorand now, and their senior dev just sits down with us once a week and talks to us for an hour. You think they're like $1 billion protocol, but you can just get super personal help. So don't ever be afraid to just ask.
This community just continues to amaze me.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Nick, we really appreciate you coming to visit us. I think this was a really great experience for our students. Oracles is something that we haven't been covering deeply in the course just yet, though we do intend to add some stuff to our curriculum. And this was really good fodder and food for thought on how to go about doing that. Also, I'd just like to say we really appreciate your time. And if you ever want to come back and do another talk for a future batch of students, the door is always open for you. And we would love to just retain that relationship with you.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, great video.
Hey, best way to get in touch with you if you were a dev who needed some help with Tellor, is it through email, or do you prefer someone to hop into your Discord, or how does it work?
Yeah, either way, nfed@tellor.io, or go follow me on Twitter, the Mandalore9. That's always an easy way. You guys can just DM me there. And then my Twitter community knows me too, so they'll point you, or my Discord community, so they'll point you in the right direction. So
thank you for sharing the time with us. Everybody give some sort of digital round of applause for Nick.
Yeah.